Are you looking to expand your aesthetic practice and attract high-quality new patients? Discover the power of digital marketing in growing your practice with a personalised strategy session. Schedule your meeting with Ryan today by visiting www.businessofesthetics.org/MSM and take the first step towards transforming your practice with the potential of digital marketing.
You're invited to join our exclusive monthly webinar brought to you by the Business of Aesthetics community. Don't let this chance slip through your fingers. Secure your spot now for a game-changing experience. Register for free on our homepage at www.businessofesthetics.org and get set to transform your strategies.
Welcome to another episode of the Business of Aesthetics podcast, brought to you by our gold sponsors, Equa Marketing. Today, we're excited to hear from Naren Arulrajah. Over to you, Naren.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another amazing episode of the Business of Aesthetics podcast. I am Naren Arulrajah, a co-founder and co-host of this podcast and community. Before we jump into today's episode, I also want to take a minute to thank all of you for your support. We have been doing this for 4 years now, 200 plus episodes. We are arguably the number one podcast for anyone in the business of aesthetics. We are listened to by tens of thousands of people in literally more than 100 countries. In the US, we are the leading podcast. So thank you for making us who we are today. Without you, we wouldn't have done it. So send in the questions, write those reviews, share it with your friends. So let's jump into today's episode. I have an awesome guest today, someone with 20 years of experience, Dr. Syed Amiry. Am I pronouncing your name correctly, Doctor?
Yes, Syed Amiry. Yeah.
Perfect. He's a cosmetic dermatologist, a board-certified cosmetic dermatologist. He has owned his practice for more than 20 years. So I just thought, why not talk to someone who has been there, done that, not just as a teacher or an educator, but in real life. I mean, every decision he made had consequences, possibly good and possibly bad, depending on how well that decision turned out. So nothing like real life. So think of it like you're going to get the wisdom of probably millions of dollars of wins and millions of dollars of mistakes all wrapped into one. So let's have some fun, Doctor. Let's jump in. So just to kind of level set and introduce you to our audience, I know you're very popular, but just in case somebody hasn't heard of you, tell us your story. Who are you? Where do you live? Where do you practice? What got you into medicine? What got you into dermatology? And if possible, give us some dates so we kind of get a history lesson as well.
Yeah, so I'll start, I guess, backwards in terms of where I am right now. I'm a cosmetic dermatologist, as you mentioned, for over 20 years. I did a residency in dermatology and afterwards a fellowship. Originally from Afghanistan, I came here to the States in 1987. And then at that point, I went to college in Iowa. Grinnell College is the name of the college. And then afterwards, then I applied to medical school. And I went to a DO school, Crooksville College of Osteopathic Medicine, also known as A.T. Still University. And then from there on, then I did a couple of internships. I actually did 2 as opposed to 1, just because I wasn't sure what I really wanted in medicine. And so at that point, then I got into residency in dermatology.
That's great. And where do you practice now? Tell us a bit about your practice. Describe the practice to us, like how big is it, how many team members, or any type of way to kind of get a feel for it, and what does it look like?
Yeah, so it's a relatively small practice. So it's located in Reston, Virginia. I have an office manager and 2 physician assistants and 2 estheticians working for me. I started as cosmetic dermatology. Although I was in Mohs trained, I decided not to do that at that time. I think part of it was money. I just didn't have enough money to put into it. So the way I actually started, which actually might be helpful to somebody starting out fresh, I just rented a couple of rooms from somebody. And here at the beginning, I had this illusion that I will have this big I will build this big building, and then I have my own freestanding building and be a dermatologist. And it turned out that the banks weren't really giving me any loans because I didn't have any collateral. And so, but what was easier to do is to rent a couple of rooms part-time during the week, I would use that office, and that's how I really got started. And now we actually own our own suite here. But a decision that I should have made years ago. So I made it a little too late in terms of buying my own suite.
Yeah. So I'm just going to unpack that. So you said start small, don't spend a lot of money. Let's kind of lean into that because I see a lot of doctors, obviously a lot of people they meet in school and after school, they're like, man, you have the best job in town. Like you are a dermatologist, you are set. And they do that in order to sell them stuff, right? Buy this, buy that. And before you know it, the doctor has signed on the dotted line for hundreds of thousands and in some cases $1 million plus debt. But
That's
as a
right.
new practice, you don't make any money, right? Like you're starting from zero. So then it creates stress, strain on yourself, your relationships, your family, and then few even fold. They just can't take the stress and they just give up and never again they go back to being a worker for the rest of their lives. So you said start really small. So expand on this. And I know it sounds so basic and obvious, but sometimes a lot of things get in the way of the basic and the obvious.
Yeah. So at that time, I guess maybe the illusion that I got was from a lot of other doctors, seeing them, having big buildings and things like that. But I really think going into debt, people think it's easier to pay off and I'm going to make all this money. Really, things don't just work out that way. And so I think that was a suggestion that was actually made by a plastic surgeon to me, which I'm grateful to this day. He says, why don't you just kind of rent a couple of rooms? I guess maybe knowing my situation, that I didn't have any money. And then I applied to quite a few banks for loans. They wouldn't give me loans. And so what finally happened is that so that was the first problem, was just finding a place to practice. After I got the place, then the next one was to have some money to actually get started or hire some people. And again, I had very little money. And so one of the things I did was I got a loan for $24,000 from a credit card company with 0% interest for a whole year. And one of the collateral was that I had to buy a really expensive dental chair for $8,000. And so I got that. I don't know if I had anything else that I bought. And then the other thing I also did was, because I was trained in laser and cosmetic surgery, I didn't have any lasers because not having money, that makes it less likely. So I used to rent lasers in the area, and they would come in once or twice a week to do that. And then the other thing I was trained in was liposuction, and liposuction equipment is not that expensive, or wasn't that expensive at that time. So that was an easy one to get started with.
Yeah, so sometimes the problems are blessings, right? The fact that at least nowadays banks are very willing to give money, especially to dermatologists, but the fact that they were not in those days ended up being a blessing, ended up being like a
Yeah.
savior. It's like, so I think that's even if people are willing to give you money, as long as you sign on the dotted line, I wouldn't take it. I would really listen to Dr. Amiry, especially for startup practices. Be super careful with your money, especially those capital expenses and even your monthly expenses. So if you can get away with one employee, only
Yeah.
hire the first one, as opposed to like, oh, let me get a team of employees and everybody's twiddling their thumbs instead of one person twiddling their thumb in the early days. So
Yeah, I
it
think
can be
that's
very
really important.
frustrating.
The other thing to think about too is, though, how hard one has to work. I think this is the other thing we don't anticipate. What does it really take to start a practice? It's very stressful. It's a lot of hours. And this is not, telling people don't do it, but I would think about this carefully as to what it really does to your lifestyle or to somebody's lifestyle. And I don't think, knowing what I know right now, I'm not sure I would have ever really started my own practice. I'm sure some people are cut out for it. I'm not sure I'm the classic entrepreneur that love to just have my own practice. I think, but the other thing that also played into this too was that it was hard to, for some reason, at that time, it was hard to find a job in the area. Don't
Mm.
know why. I actually sent out resumes and nobody was hiring for some reason, or it just, I think I waited maybe about 6 months or so, and it just didn't quite happen. And there was actually a company that, pharmaceutical company, who actually did me a favor and sent out those letters. But so that was another reason that played into it. In retrospect, I think it's a lot of hours, and so the stress can take its toll on people, and it really can mess up the balance in our lives. And I think, this is my belief, that this is probably one of the reasons a lot of physicians are burned out. And so that's, I think it's important to pay attention to this upfront.
No, absolutely. Now, I know you said, had I known what I had known, I may not have started, but also you didn't have a choice because nobody was hiring. So either that or stay at home and be unemployed and, have mom and dad take care of you, which I'm sure you didn't want to do after finishing your,
Exactly. And mom and dad are not even here, actually. So what I was doing at that time was I might have been able to support myself because I was working with an ENT in an ENT office, but they had no support system for dermatologists or cosmetic dermatologists. So
right.
I was doing everything that a medical assistant should be doing. Again, not the best use of my time. So that if I had taken off there and they really supported me, I think it would have worked out. But they didn't know how to support me. And I think those are all important considerations. And so that's why I ended up
Yeah.
with it. Yeah.
Let's kind of talk about stress and burnout, right? And I'm going left field here, and
Yeah.
I'm not just talking to startups. I'm talking to everyone in your
Right.
practice. And I bet you have developed certain things to hopefully manage. I mean, I think anybody would be lying if they say, "Oh, I have zero stress," especially as a doctor and a business owner. So, like, what are some of the tips you would give to manage and I'm not talking about just stress management. I'm just saying like the way you run your business, the way you organize your business, so it hopefully doesn't cause as much stress.
Yeah. So I've always done this. Even at the time when I started my practice, I actually started going to a lot of self-development courses. And so my belief was that if I can fill up my mind with ideas, hopefully I'll have a better chance of living a better life. And to this day, I continue to live by that. I think I'm not one of those people who wakes up happy in the morning. Some people are. I'm not one of them. So I have to work on that in terms of just being in a better mood. And so taking self-care really is important. But the other is also leveraging our time so that we don't have to work that many hours, creating systems for it. And I think through time, I've certainly created that. But I think figuring out what's the best use of our time is really important. So I have an office manager now. I mean, she takes care of a lot of administrative stuff. I always have had that, but I've also perfected the technique through time. And one of the other things I did was at the time when I started, I think it was a few years into it, I hired a business coach. And he taught me a system. It's called personal development interview. And that system was in terms of how do you hold people accountable so that they do what they're supposed to do. Because the opposite is we talk to a manager or somebody and just saying, I want these things done. And then next week we kind of forget about it because we get caught in all the other stuff. So having a system that a system of follow-up and a system of developing people, and I can certainly elaborate on that a little bit more. So that was really helpful to me. And to this day, I continue to use that system.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you 3 follow-up questions based on what you just said. First is around give me the top 3 books that made an impact in your life. And then perhaps let's start there. So actually it's 4 questions there.
Yeah. So I think one is 3 books. That's a little tough, but one was by Tony Robbins, Awaken the Giant Within. And the second one, I would
Well,
say,
okay. So what did it do for you? Like why was that one? Why is that in the top 3 for you?
yeah, it has to, I think a lot of it had to do with beliefs. What are your beliefs about life, about your practice? And it just created more self-awareness for me. And I actually went through, a lot of people just kind of read the book. That's not a book you can just read it. You have to do the exercises and you have to unpack your own beliefs. Awareness is not enough. So that was one of them. The other one is Think and Grow Rich. And one of the statements there is that, when you look at success in life, one of the riches it talks about it is having a pleasing personality, which is really important in interaction with patients. I really do the best I can when I walk into that room, that I want to make sure that the patients know that I'm happy to see them. I'm not the burned out doctor and it's not that I didn't go through burnout. I certainly did, but I am on the other end of it. And the third one I'd probably say is that Keith Cunningham's book, And that's a blueprint for a massively successful or something like that, I think. But it's Keith Cunningham is the author. A blueprint for a massively successful business, a small business, I think is what you call it. And the belief there is, or what he talks about, is that getting big should be the result of your practice growing into that. Don't try to create a big practice, but stay profitable and stay small. And so I'd say those three books. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. So going back to the second comment you made about systems, I want to unpack that. You said two things. One is you made it into systems, so it was not something you have to like stress over every day. It just happens, right? You do it, other people do it. And then you also touched on accountability, because even for something as simple as accountability, a lot of people don't have systems. They have an idea, they talk about it, but then is it happening? Is it not happening? If it's not happening, why is it not happening? Like even those conversations, right? Till it starts working. So expand on systems, and what are you doing with systems? And like, anyways, any tips that other practice owners can learn from?
Yeah. So I don't know if I can speak so much to system, but what I would say is, though, whatever I wanted in the practice, and I've thought about it through the weeks in terms of what, like every week there's something that I think about. And so it takes me about half an hour, 45 minutes to get ready for the personal development interview. And during that time, I ask my office manager about all the different things I check in on. And that is, so for example, management. And because now we have 15 people, I want to make sure that, so if there's one system, there's a system of accountability, or it's a system of developing people. Because the way it works is that there is 95% of the people like to take it pretty easy. There's the 5% of the people that are very proactive, and you probably don't need to do a whole lot to manage them. Well, the question becomes, how do you develop the other 95% of the people in your organization that they become as good as the 5%? Now, whether you're going to approach that or not, I don't really know, but at least but you can try, and that is developing them so that they actually perform the way you want them to perform in the organization. And that's why it's personal development interview. And so those are the questions really to ask. So one of the questions asked is, did you conduct personal development interviews? And that is weekly, because if you don't touch base with your subordinates or those employees on a weekly basis, it's hard to develop them. And so it's questions about marketing, for example, make sure activities take place there, reducing, for example, expenses of the business. If they have new employees, if there are issues that have come up, just talking about that. Or the other thing, that came up last week, and it was something pretty simple, but it wasn't really thought about. And maybe just because, my background, I know this, that for laser resurfacing, it takes a lot now to prepare the patients for. Well, instead of having them in the middle of the day, why not have that patient come in early in the day and have them ready by the time I get started? And so it's something as simple as that. So creating a system like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I heard, and let me summarize and just, fill in the blanks. So you have to think about the things that are critical for your success.
That's
so for
right.
example, let's say marketing, right? So what are the metrics? How many new patients am I getting? Where am I getting those new patients from, right? So first you have to think about what's important to your success. And then on a regular, you have to assign someone internally or externally. It could be an outside company, it could be internally, like you are in charge of this, right? And then you have to have conversations on a regular basis, whether it's weekly, monthly, whatever it is, to review how are we doing? Okay, are we getting the number of new patients, right? And if we are not, why? What can we do to maybe improve? So instead of, we wanted to get 30, we are at 20, so how do we get to 25? What can we do? So you're saying that accountability conversation on a regular basis, and then of course problem solving, doing what you can to help support that person or that company to achieve that goal is critical. And now I'm using marketing as an example, and then you can
That's
go
right.
back into estheticians, like having a conversation with them. What are they expected to accomplish, and
That's
then are
right.
they doing a good job or they're not, or if not, how do we tweak it? So you're saying that just periodic conversation, these accountability conversations are critical for success. Am I correct? On
That
a
is
regular
correct.
basis.
And I
Okay.
wouldn't say periodically. I think they have to be done weekly, because
Right.
it's hard. Yeah. So it really, that cadence, it's the same time every week, and they have to be done weekly.
Right. In your case, do you have a conversation like that with your office manager, and then she has 10 conversations with 10 people because you have 15 employees? Or do you have 3 people you talk to on a regular basis? Or I mean, more than
No,
that.
just the office manager.
Office manager.
Yeah, I guess I've always done it that way, and then I have her do the person development interviews for the rest of the stuff.
Right. And then you make sure she's doing a good job. She's doing it the way you want it done. Like, what are the things, the metrics you're going to be reviewing? What are the things? And then do you get an update from her as to how she's doing it, like next level down, like for
That's right.
different
Yeah, I
people?
do.
Okay. Right. So she comes prepared to your meeting. Hey, here is all the personal development conversations I had, and this is kind of what happened. So you can maybe read up on it before you go into the meeting, so you are ready to ask any questions or make any suggestions. Great.
Yeah.
Coming back to you made a comment. You said I went through burnout, right? So tell me what caused it, and then how did you get out of it?
Yeah. So I think it's just long hours and really being stressed out about just work or thinking about work all the time. Because I think the way I really think about it is I'm not sure that, I'd like to say that what really makes a big difference to live a well-balanced life, but how often do we really sit down and think about what does that really entail? I mean, it entails the most important areas of our lives. And I don't think I was paying enough attention to it because I worked very long hours, and then especially starting a new business at that time, I mean, it took a lot of hours. And so that all of that caused burnout, where to the point where I really didn't really enjoy coming to work. And I still practice out of integrity, but I've really scaled back now and really invest time in self-care. And that is, just got to value our own well-being, our own happiness. And one of the things I did at that time was also my first book on happiness. Well, it was empowering to know that because I was unhappy overall, there was a way to become happy. And so one of the first books that I read about that was The How of Happiness, as to how to become a happier person. And so it was helpful to know that there is a strategy. And then since then, I actually took a course in positive psychology, and I got a certificate just to know more about those strategies. But that's how I got out of it. But one of the people that I consider a mentor is Jim Rohn, and he says, if you want to make a living, focus on your work. But if you want to make a fortune, focus on your personal growth and development. And I continue to really think about that, because that if you're the other is if you're not really happy, but you've made massive wealth, it's not really worth much. And so I think personal happiness and fulfillment, it gives me at least more meaning and purpose, and I don't mind doing the work, but I also am careful not to work too many hours.
Yeah, I know we can spend an entire episode talking about this, but just my personal experience, I was very successful, I guess came from my mom. Like I would get an 80. She's like, what about 85? I would get 85. She's like, what about 90? Even when I get 100, what about 105? Right? She's always like encouraging in a nice way. She doesn't like look down on me or anything, but to keep going, keep going. And then I realized I just kept going, whether it's my business or whatever, I had some goals or visions and kept going. But then when she passed last year, I really thought about, instead of just keep going and going and going, it's like the Energizer Bunny. Like, what do I want? So the more I started thinking about what I want, I realized there are buckets, self, right? That's
Right.
meditation, sleep, food, exercise, just take care of yourself.
Yeah.
And then relationships, that is, wife, kids, friends, family, the world. And all of these, I started writing down goals, right? What would could look like in every one of those buckets. And then finally, work, because I mean, people are different. I cannot retire. And, my dad did that, and he started dying literally for 15 years later. He got sicker and sicker, and he passed away. I think for me, like, I think I'll always work, maybe less, maybe different kinds of things. So let me ask you this. What solved it for you? When did you feel like, okay, I don't feel burnt out anymore? What do you like? And I give you my formula, and I feel a lot happier now than I used to be. Like, I'm just trying to figure out, like, is there a formula that anyone can grab onto and solve it, or maybe not?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, this is just one person's perspective, right?
Yeah.
And so I think for me, at least, maybe, so right now I have, maybe it's starting this way. Right now I have two kids and they're really young. So starting family late in life, it just worked out that way. But maybe if I would have had early in my life, I would have felt a sense of fulfillment. So I would say probably in the last 4 years or so since I've had my kids, it's been a lot more fulfilling, and I would say I've been a lot happier than I've been in the past. So that's what I would say. And then the other thing is really becoming more having better coaches maybe, or having coaches and having some therapy. And I feel like, I think therapy and coaches are both really helpful, because this is the way I look at it, is you look at some of the best that are in their field. How did they become that way? They usually have coaches, maybe therapists as well. But life doesn't just happen on its own. I think there are very few people that have figured it out. I wasn't one of those people. I've had to work at it, and I continue to work at it. To and I think we can figure this out in terms of living a better life. There are very few people, and I don't mean, and even with my patients, I don't hold anything back. I'm pretty transparent about this, because I think people do need to focus on their mental health. And so I'd like to say that when I was saying that, so the how of happiness, one of the things I learned there was that 50% of the people actually wake up happy. They just have the happiness gene. There's about 50% of the people that really don't, and out of that, 40% is how they use their mind. Well, that's very empowering, that 40% of the happiness for those people is how they use their mind. About 10% of them is circumstances. And so knowing that statistics for me was very helpful, that there is actually a formula. But I would say the biggest difference is really having kids and seeing them, their faces, and how much I really love them. That has made the biggest difference for me.
Yeah. So you're saying relationships, right? So I agree. And I think unfortunately, most of us business owners slash, doctors end up putting that at the end, right? We put relationships and self at the end, and then we put work at the top. I think it has to be one third, one third, one third, in terms of energy and emotions and how much, and that creates happiness. When, like you said, you go home and you have kids who are just so excited to see you and want to sit on your lap and like play a game with you, it just changes everything. But if you don't go home on time and you go home by the time they're sleeping, then of course that's not happening either. So you have to lean into those things.
Yeah, no, definitely. So I think, the big category is relationships. I definitely value relationships a lot more than I did before. And I do believe that a lot of our happiness does come from relationships. And that's one of the things that makes my work a lot more fulfilling, because I think through time I've developed the capacity to connect with my patients on a much deeper level than I would have.
It's kind of funny, right? When you relate to your family relationships, you become a better person with your employees, with your patients, because you're a happier person. So it's kind of, so your relationships start transforming everywhere. And then, of course, now patients are seeing a happy doctor versus a burnt out doctor who's like, I don't want to see you. How do I get out of here like in 1 minute, right? That's how they feel.
Yeah.
Versus somebody who's so happy to see them. And it doesn't mean you're spending 3 hours with each patient, but just who you are and how you're being, I think just comes across pretty naturally.
Yeah.
Let's go and talk about a few other topics.
Sure.
Hiring is key, right? So hiring the right people. So talk about the lessons learned, the mistakes, the the right way to do things, whatever you want to share.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I don't think I'm really the best guy at this. I've certainly hired people, and despite the fact that I've had a system that I've created for it, I'm really not. I have not been the best at it. I think right now I feel like I have a pretty good office manager, and then it's a really good office. So, but maybe a couple of things that I've learned is, one is that, and this comes from Brian Tracy, who talks about hiring and firing. And he says maybe the first time you think about firing somebody, you probably should do it. And then the second is that when you hire somebody, you really should take your time. The challenging part is, what I've realized for myself is I'm pretty impulsive. I really can like people right away and just they share my values and think about that, and I just go ahead and that's what I've done in the past. The other thing that I think is maybe a sign of I would say is that I think when we expect people to buy into our vision, I feel like that's really a mistake. I think it's expecting them to buy into our vision is I think that's helpful, but I think it's not as necessary as holding accountable for what you want to accomplish in the organization. If they naturally buy into your vision, that is a plus, and that's really important. But there is a fine distinction where it's having the need that they need to buy into your vision and try to sell it to them. If somebody's doing that, at least for me, I think what I've learned is that I've done a lot more of that in the past, as opposed to, you know what, these are the things I want to accomplish. And it's nice that they buy into it. And if they don't, that's okay as well. If they're showing up, they're doing a great job, then I think that's really important. The other thing I would say is this, that, and again, this came from one of Tony Robbins' perspective in terms of hiring. He was giving the example of, he was talking to one of the coaches, the football coaches. He says, I'm really impressed how you inspire your players to play their best. And he told him, he says, as important as inspiration is, selection is even more important. So hiring the right person becomes a lot more important than trying to inspire them to do a better job.
Yeah. So when it comes to hiring, even I've made my share of mistakes. A few things I realized is if it's an important role, go slow. Interview as many people as possible, get different people to interview the person, get different perspectives. And if in doubt, don't hire, right? It's better to be like, and even then, it's only 50-50 chance of success. So then the early days, the mentoring, those one-on-one conversations you alluded to really, invest in their success, at least in the first 3x months. And if you don't do that, then I guess, it won't work. So hire slow and go slow, but then fire fast. So I guess that's a good way to sum it up. Am I correct?
Yeah. No, I think you're right. Yeah. You're
Perfect.
probably a lot more systematic than I am, honestly. And I haven't hired people for a long time now. So yeah,
We have like 260 people. So we have like a department that has 6 people just for hiring and managing these people and everything else. So it's not easy though, but I think like anything else, you can get better at it. So
right.
yeah. So let's talk about equipment. I know it's a hot topic, and a lot of people cry about the money they spent or wasted on technology, like big checks, and it doesn't pay off. And then now they're paying the monthly payment for years and years and years. I'm not saying everyone, but I would say majority of practice owners have had this challenge. Have you had this challenge? Or if you didn't, how did you avoid it? Just give us some tips.
I'm sorry, the challenge of what exactly?
Like, over investing in technology in the wrong time, and then, all these monthly payments to pay. Like, have you had that problem, or you always were very good at buying the right technology and not being stressed about it?
Yeah, I think, well, I've certainly made mistakes. Yeah, I wish I was perfect, but I'd like to think that we have pretty good technology right now. But I've certainly bought equipment in the past. So I'd say a few tips that are really important. And that is, one is, I still think that if somebody can buy it used, I think it's really important. But the things you got to think about is, if you're going to buy used equipment, get the training somehow. Just make sure that the staff is trained well enough. So that I think is really important. But the other is too, is that physicians never learn how to negotiate, and they're really taken advantage of. That is so important. One is to negotiate, but the other is also to check around as well with other physicians in terms of what is the best price in buying that. But the other is too, is though, I think a lot of time these companies, they tell you that in 6 months you would have paid something, a piece of equipment would have been paid for in 6 months or a year or something like that. That may be true, but you really got to think about as to, is that, do you really have the patient population for a certain technology? So those would be some of the things I would think about. And the other is too, is though, I think the problem I think that I have, this is the mistake I've made, is I've just been so busy sometimes in the past, and I've had, the business has generated enough that I've just thrown money into something. And that's one of the biggest mistakes, because that day that may not be a problem, but sooner or later that could become a problem, where now it's harder to pay the debt. So keeping expenses low is so important. I cannot overemphasize this, because I also feel like we've made the mistake of partying when we had enough money, and then there were times when we didn't have enough money to pay for payroll. Well, that's what you call mismanagement. And
Right.
so I think having a healthy bank account and continuing to keep that is really important.
Yeah, I think while you're speaking, maybe a tip that would help is you said one of the keys to success with people is that accountability meeting, right? What do you call a personal development meeting on a
Personal
weekly
development,
basis.
yeah.
So that you need the weekly cadence, but here maybe you need a slower cadence. In other words, have an annual plan for what you're going to buy and be very thoughtful about it. I'm going to only buy 2 things, 3 things, and only at this time. So take 6 months to think about it, as opposed to the sales guy's there and he just does an amazing job, making you feel good and saying, "Hey, let's do it." And then before you know it, you're committed. So maybe I don't know what's your tip. I'm just brainstorming here. I'm just thinking aloud, why do people make mistakes and how to stop it?
Yeah, well, I think so. When it comes to that, in that particular case, I really think a question that really is important, and I do actually ask this question a lot more now than I used to. What is the problem that they're trying to solve? You're buying a piece of equipment. What are you trying to solve? And the second portion is there some low-hanging fruit that you're not taking advantage of? For example, when it comes to fillers and Botox, or any of the neuromodulators, that's an easy one to get started with, and you don't have to buy a whole lot of inventory, as opposed to buying a piece of equipment. So can you do that right now as opposed to buying a big piece of equipment? The second is, can you rent it for a while and develop the patient population and have enough enough patients, and then at that point you can buy the piece of equipment that you're looking for. So those would be, I think, the ways I would go about it. But really asking the question, what are the problems that you're solving? That I think becomes really important. And then, I think taking the time to really evaluate the decision, the pros and cons, is another thing that I think it can save somebody the thousands of dollars.
Yeah, I love that trial and try meaning by rent before you and create the demand before investing, because now you have the demand to pay the bills and twice as much as your annual monthly cost, then go buy it, right? But a lot
Right.
of people don't do that, so they just buy it and they haven't created the demand, so now it becomes a problem. Like you're spending 4 grand a month and you don't have enough to even just cover the cost, so you are like stressed out. So I totally agree. I think those are great tips. Let me just go through the other notes I have. Let's talk about mentors. Do you have mentors? Do you mentee people? Like, what's your take on the whole thing?
I've certainly had mentors in the past. At this point, I'm not sure that I have any mentors. The guy who actually started me with the personal development interview, he actually passed away from COVID, but he was a great mentor to me. So that would be one person. The other person that I actually look up to is a lot of Tony Robbins stuff. Um, and so that's both for inspiration as well as ideas. In fact, last year we bought one of his programs called the Business Accelerator. That's been really helpful to us in just relooking at our business and doing things, the marketing and otherwise, to make it more successful. So I guess I would say different people. It's not been so much, I think, in the industry, but outside the industry. And then I also took a course with Keith Cunningham, who teaches business mastery for Tony Robbins. So I went to one of his courses. The only thing I would say is, though, if somebody is contemplating going to a long course, at least this is my experience, I think it's very hard to implement all of that. 4 days just and then come back and start implementing it. There are people that are probably much better at it than I am, but I think if somebody's going to take a long course, they really got to evaluate. And that also came from my business mentor, the one who taught me about the business development interview or the personal development interview. And that was, it's hard to implement when you come back with that much information, all in a big binder or something like that. And so a little bit at a time, having a business coach, or I think it's crucially important to have a business coach or a life coach to implement a lot of things.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I have always had coaches. I changed them because after a while, my needs change or I want to learn different things. So you don't have to like be stuck with the
That's right.
same person, forever. But having an idea of all, growing all the time and having a coach to help you grow, I think that's brilliant. As we finish this up, I I have one question, and then I want to have you share your final words.
Sure.
So leadership, any feedback on leadership? Leadership development.
Well, I think what I've realized is through time, the real leadership doesn't come easily, and we to assume that somehow this happens naturally is, I think, pretty silly. It's to quote Keith Cunningham, he says, business is complicated, and anybody who thinks it's simple is stupid. And I really think that that's very true. And so leadership also comes down to, I think, examining our beliefs, what our beliefs really are. Like one of the things that I said was there's expecting or hoping that people will come along as opposed to hiring the right people. And then the other is not be afraid to hold people accountable. That I think is, and those that I think have a hard time holding people accountable, they really need to look at their pathology. And this is not to put anybody down, but this is really the nice guy syndrome that could be coming along with them. And if that's not worked on, I think it's hard to be effective. These things don't just happen. And then, of course, you have the extreme where some of the people are not the nicest, but they've accomplished a lot. And I don't mean that it's one or the other. I think we have to develop a style, but be aware or be mindful of what that style of leadership really is. And so that's, I think looking for harmony, looking for somebody buying into your vision, and then hopefully they will do what you want them to do. I think that's a mistake. I really think that a leader does need to have a lot more strength and be strong and not be so afraid, to come from a place of fear as opposed to from a place of strength and being clear about the vision of what they want to implement, and then holding people accountable to implement that vision.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amiry. Really enjoyed this conversation. Young boy from Afghanistan, came to a new country and became a dermatologist and built a practice, employed 15 people, and obviously made a difference in the lives of thousands. So something you should be proud of. And now, of course, working with your kids, or spending time with your kids and enjoying life. So really an awesome story. Any final tips as we wrap this up?
I guess the only other thing I would say is that as important as it is to manage one's practice, I think it's probably even more important to manage one's finances. And this is an area where I've made mistakes, and I've even hired financial planners and things like that. And then looking at them to even help me with some of the business stuff, I'm not sure that was the best. So here are some of the things that I've learned. I actually fired my financial planner not too long ago. And giving them a percentage of one's asset is a huge mistake. Not learning or refusing to learn about finances is even a bigger mistake, because we work for our money, but we do nothing to manage our finances. That's what I did as well, and somehow trusting that somebody else can work in your best interest. Things don't just work out that way. Yeah. So that, I think that would be maybe one of my final tips, is that we're all responsible for everything that happens in our lives. And if we're going to work hard for something, then learn how to manage it as well. And it's easier than people think it is.
I would agree with that. Like, not a single financial manager I have met is working for you. They're just working for that fees, 1-2%. And they don't care. It could be like, I have had stories where your assets will continue to go down, but their fees will continue to stay flat.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's scary sometimes. But anyways, thank you so much, Dr. Amiry. I really appreciate your time today and everything you shared openly and honestly. And, so thank you for that. I also want to take a minute to thank our listeners. Once again, if you enjoyed this conversation, share this on social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, you name it. Looking forward to seeing you soon and continuing this conversation again, hopefully in the next episode. Till then, have an awesome week ahead.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Business of Aesthetic podcast series, brought to you by our gold sponsor, Equa Marketing. Would you like to join our growing group of aesthetic industry experts and get featured on the Business of Aesthetics podcast? Or do you know someone who would love to share their strategies for growth in the aesthetic business, providing quality patient care, or their clinical expertise? Head over to www.businessofesthetics.org podcast show and apply to be featured as a guest on the show. Remember to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Amazon Music, or wherever you listen. If you would like to engage with today's speakers or any of our past speakers, join our Facebook group or LinkedIn group by searching for Business of Aesthetics. Thank you, and have a great day.